So, yes, thank you very much to both our speakers. We're now going to move on. We've got just less than 20 minutes for some questions and answers. We've been getting quite a few. I think the first one I'm going to ask is probably more directed at you, Kathryn. So it's about the National Infrastructure Commission's Anticipate, React and Recover report, which came out in June. And Amanda has two related questions to this. So she's interested in the Climate Change Committee, the Committee on Climate Change's response to the report and the request for the government to set resilience standards, because without shared agreement on what the level of adaptation we're aiming for is, she's concerned that we won't get action. And then she links that specifically to the new flood and coastal erosion risk strategy, which doesn't mention anywhere what standard of protection should be provided. And there are societal expectations around flood risk mitigation, and government and regulators and infrastructure providers when they have service failures, but they're reluctant to say what level of resilience should be provided or funded. So is that something you could respond to, Kathryn?
Yeah, that's fine, Kate. Thanks for the question, Amanda. And there's a few bits to an answer to this, so I'll try and go through them in turn. So the National Infrastructure Commission published a report on resilience across all infrastructure sectors in May. The formal government response we're still waiting for, so Treasury needs to coordinate that with input from all departments. But having had a quick chat with Amanda, she's referring to the updated flood and coastal erosion risk management policy statement that came out a couple of weeks ago from DEFRA alongside the new flood risk management strategy for England. And the policy statement references the NIC's report, but says it isn't planning to instigate resilience standards in the way they're set out in the NIC report. So there's a few comments around this. So one is what is meant by resilience standards. So Amanda, one of the key things we could show you is a joint letter that we sent to ministers from us, the NIC and Flood Re back in January that promotes the idea of resilience standards in flood risk management. I'll send you the link. I'll put the link for the letter in the chat box in case anybody's interested in reading that. But yes, we absolutely do support the idea of resilience standards. Where I'd say we may differ slightly from maybe some other organisations is in what those mean. So we don't necessarily think it's possible to have a consistent standard of protection for flooding around the whole country. So in our minds, resilience standards say you could have a resilience standard that is everybody in the country has access to some form of flood resilience, whether it's defences or property level flood protection or something else. That's kind of more the standards that we would think that are more workable across the country, because risk is so heterogeneous across the country and the costs and benefits are so different in terms of putting in place different measures that you do need more local standards. And I think the Environment Agency in its strategy was pointing towards the same thing, because they haven't articulated a national standard, but they've said we need to think about resilience standards across the country. But that's all set out in our letter, which I'll send a link to. The other thing that's related to that is actually Jason's question from further down, so I'll do that one at the same time if that's all right, Kate, because Jason's asking about attitude to risk or risk appetite, and that's very closely linked to resilience standards. And we're very keen to see government taking a more ambitious and proactive role in articulating what its risk appetite is, because you can't really say that you're making progress on adaptation unless you're saying what you're actually achieving, what you're trying to achieve through adaptation. And in the CCRA, we're setting out the levels of risk, as Richard has articulated, but we're not suggesting what the goal should be to adapt to those risks. That's the role of the National Adaptation Programme. So I'd say the risk appetite question is not something that we're looking at in the CCRA, but we would strongly like to see that better articulated in the resulting programmes, and then we can measure progress against those goals that are being set out by government, and also commenting on whether we think they're the right goals.
Right. Thank you very much, Kathryn. Anything you want to add to that, Richard? Or?
No, that covers it. Thank you. We can move on to the next question. Yeah.
Well, maybe this one. So you mentioned that mitigation is considered separately, but aren't mitigation and adaptation so intrinsically connected in reality that they could be better considered together?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. What I sort of meant to say was that the individual risks in themselves don't necessarily directly influence the sort of mitigation policy, or there's the interaction with the net zero, which I'll come on to in a minute. But the point is, the individual risks are supposed to inform adaptation in individual areas. It is quite clear that the evidence that we're coming out with here would help inform people of the need for mitigation. Where this would interact with mitigation is the impacts on net zero. So, as I mentioned, if the net zero UK goal implies changes in forestry, agricultural practices, energy infrastructure, etc., if those are affected by climate risks, so if, say, forestry is relied upon to produce carbon sink, but there's an increased risk of wildfire, that would have an implication for that aspect of mitigation policy. So they are kind of connected. It's just the way that they are, that it's structured risk by risk to inform adaptation, but yes, it will merge in with mitigation as well. So thanks for raising that one. Yeah.
Okay, there's another one specifically about the UK's marine environment. So, where is it gone? Do you know at this stage to what extent CCRA 3 will include risks the UK's marine environment?
It definitely will. The examples of risks I chose just happened not to include marine examples, I guess. So apologies for that. But yes, we're definitely looking at marine biodiversity. We've got experts in that as part of the contributing authors. We're looking at coastal flooding, coastal erosion, and so on. So very much so. Yeah.
And then there's what about the adaptation reporting power and how many of the reports CCRA 3 will be able to assess? You mentioned Anglian water, but are there others that you're bringing in, or how many others?
Yeah, that's probably one for me, Kate. Not many is the answer, unfortunately. I think there's always been an issue about the timing of the adaptation reporting power cycle and the timing of the CCRA. And I think DEFRA's view this time around was it was going to be unrealistic to request new reports to come in time for them to be included in the technical chapters. But as you say, Anglian Water's already done it, so we're already looking through that one, and we are expecting a handful of other ones. We've written another letter, which I can also put in the chat box, which was published yesterday or the day before, to all CEOs of all reporting organisations, urging them to ensure that the adaptation reporting power reports don't fall through the cracks, given obviously all of the other pressures and difficulties that every organisation has been having to deal with over the last few months. It's one of those things that can be seen as quite processy and maybe can be deprioritised, but they're incredibly useful to us in assessing progress. So that letter is really just pointing out how great they are when they're published, and that we really do make good use of them. So I'll put a link to that letter in the box as well.
Yeah, that letter, it makes a nice case for showing that it's about showing leadership as well, doesn't it? The other aspect of that, as well as the adaptation reporting powers for on sort of government side, there's on the finance side, there's the task group for climate-related financial disclosure is encouraging companies to be clear and transparent about their risks, exposure under climate change, both to physical climate hazards, climate change, and also to the transition to a low carbon economy as well. And that it's in early days, but that may also provide some more visibility in due course, but probably not much in time for CCRA 3. Yeah.
Great. And I think it's another one quite specific for you, Richard, is around the jet stream question. So stalling weather systems due to blocking jet stream events seem to be poorly understood due to the complexities, but may carry significant risk of drought and flooding. How is work progressing on understanding?
So this is one reason why we're keen to use the new climate models, because they are generally better in this regard. Although you still can't predict changes in circulation patterns, such as the jet stream, with high confidence. So you have to account for a wide range of outcomes. UK weather is clearly strongly determined by the jet stream, and whether we do get drier summers or wetter summers does depend on the statistics of what happens with the jet stream. So we can't make specific predictions. So this is why we call it a risk assessment. So we're looking at possibilities, but the science is definitely progressing on that, and the new models are definitely better in that regard.
Okay. And this is something I know you've been thinking about, Kathryn, and the Climate Change Committee around COVID. So how much is there an assumption that the current disruption due to COVID-19 is temporary, or is likely to affect exposure to climate risk due to longer term changes, for example, in working patterns, travel, and affect existing adaptation by changes in funding and priorities? So how is that being considered?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a tricky one, because I don't think anybody knows really what the long-term implications are going to be, and we'd like to see a lot of the positive changes that have happened as a result of something really awful, like more active travel through walking and cycling, more appreciation of the natural environment. It would be great to see those continuing, but it's very hard to predict if that's going to be the case. We have done some internal analysis both on what COVID has meant for short-term emissions, both for greenhouse gas emissions and air quality. There's been quite a lot on that's been published, but also on some of the resilience side. So water use has shot up in a lot of areas. I know Amanda's on the call, so she might have some comments to make about that. And also, obviously, with more people working from home, we're more exposed to any climate hazards that come to us through the home environment. So overheating, people living at flood risk. There were people very sadly affected by the flooding over the winter who then also had to self-isolate because of COVID. And you can't imagine really how difficult that's been for people. We are trying very hard through the chapters, and Richard may want to say a bit more about this, to do some what-if scenario analysis of the implications of COVID, but it does fit in terms of the method, and it fits within our socioeconomic bit. So when we think about socioeconomic change, we're including things like any long-term implications from COVID, and we're also including net zero in that as well. So we're looking at climate risks to a net zero UK. So if you have, say, a huge increase in hydrogen or CCS, that's very water intensive. What does that look like? What are the risks to offshore and onshore wind, all of those sorts of things. So that is included as well. It's quite hard to do analytically, but it is within scope. Is there anything else you want to say on that one, Richard?
Yeah, so this is why this round of the CCOA is seems like an order of magnitude more challenging and complicated than the previous one, which was already hard, because it's a bit of a moving target. All these, net zero is new, and then just as we got our head around how we're going to deal with that, COVID came. So as Kathryn says, we are trying to see what we can learn from that and what its implications are. One other important aspect of that is the international dimension, and how it sort of shows that risks elsewhere in the world propagate to the UK. So it's potentially a sort of learning experience there as well, but it's ongoing how we're actually going to address this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question here about the kind of knowledge that you can use in the risk assessment process. So, and wondering how local knowledge is considered in risk assessments and adaptation. So what kind of knowledge can you bring into the process?
So the evidence we're using has to be robust. So we could use local knowledge if it's coming through a way which we can be confident with. So either through the peer-reviewed academic literature or through official reports which have been quality controlled. So it's not just about scientific papers. It is also about consultancy reports, government reports. Some of them have some kind of quality control process. So we don't just go out and randomly ask someone on the street. If there was community level stuff that was feeding through in a robust way, that would be useful. Although I think we are mostly looking at the sort of higher level, really, at the sort of the scale of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. but we've got some specific case studies which are illustrating particular issues, such as coastal communities at risk of high risk of flooding and so on. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thanks. I think we've probably just got time for one more question. Have you considered adopting a storyline approach to describing future uncertainty?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Richard, you want to start, and I can add anything else.
Well, yeah, we have, because it is so complicated trying to sort of cover all possibilities of uncertainty and everything. So, and the thing is, when you've got multiple risks perhaps coinciding or following on one from the other, you can't assess all possibilities. So actually just developing a narrative based on one particular climate future aligned with a socio-economic future can be quite helpful to talk this through. So yeah.
And there's other work going on through the Climate Resilience SPF, but also some EU funded work that's looking at developing better storyline approaches for the UK. So I think it was Chris that asked that question. If you're interested, it's worth looking through the Climate Resilience website. But also there's an EU funded project looking at socioeconomic trends globally and how they impact on Europe, that Ted Shepherd at Reading is involved in, and he's a great advocate of storyline approaches, and that's taking a storylines based approach to that. So we're hoping to use that in CCRA4, but that might be an interesting one for Chris to look at.
Is that the Receipt project?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, so many thanks to both Kathryn and Richard for your presentations, very clear. I'm just going to share. So yeah, thank you very much to both of you. I hope everyone just enjoyed the discussion. I'm sorry it's a kind of very tight period for the discussion and there were more questions than we had time for. We will be putting up the slides and recordings from today's webinar. They'll be out in the next few days and will be sent to participants. And just a brief advert for the next webinar. So there's going to be a bit of a break over August, and then there'll be another webinar on the British public's perceptions of climate risk and adaptation options and resilience by Professor Nick Pidgeon at Cardiff University. And then and I encourage you to go to the website, because there's all of the webinars for the rest of the year are up there, and there's another 8. But on behalf of the Champion team here at Leeds, many thanks again to the speakers and for all your questions, and thanks for attending, and I hope to connect again with you all soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Bye.